You're on 94.9. It is 14 minutes past 4, and it's Tuesday afternoon, time for Creation Ministries International. And this afternoon we have Dr. Tas Walker, who is a pretty smart dude when it comes to geomorphology. Is that right, Dr. Tas?
Geomorphology and stuff to do with geology and all sorts of things like that, stratigraphy. They got all sorts of different names for it, but it's good to catch up with you, Mick.
Yes, it's awesome to catch up with you after Christmas and particularly this week, because I found a story that I really wanted to ask you about. And, of course, Dr. Tas, being, an expert when it comes to geomorphology, can you explain for us first what geomorphology is, Dr. Tas?
Geo means rocks. It means earth, rocks, and that sort of thing. Geology. So geo and morphology. Morph means shape. So it means the shape of the earth. So geomorphology deals with things like mountains and rivers and valleys and riverbeds and all that sort of stuff. And we've got a geomorphologist at CMI. His name is Ron Neller. So he's a fluvial geomorphologist. And so geomorphology is very interesting to look at the shape of the earth, and the Bible, the Noah's flood in the Bible, explains it really amazingly.
Yeah, well, there's been some very interesting stories. In fact, I saw one that you wrote called The Old Man of Hoy, which was quite interesting. But I saw one in the news this week that really grabbed my attention because, of course, we've been talking a lot about AI recently. And, this headline said, AI discovers life existed on Earth 1 billion years earlier than we thought. And basically they're talking about how, rocks have memories, and they've been looking at, rocks to come up with this whole story. Very interesting story. So I thought I'd ask you, what this new machine is, this new rock age machine is.
Well, there wouldn't be a rock machine that measures the age, I don't think, of that one. Generally, they find a rock in a certain area, and it's already been assigned a date. I'd have to read the article to see that. They'd already assigned a date. So because they find it in the area, they say, these are a billion years older than the ones we found before over the other side of the mountain. So it often depends upon where they find the rock. They just give it the age depending on the rock they find it in. So that's what happened. They found it in a place, by the sound of it, that they didn't expect it to find it in. So that's why they said it's a billion years older, which is amazing. It's a lot. It's interesting, isn't it? They say, well, we got it wrong last time, but we're right this time.
Well, the interesting thing is, obviously, a lot of people read these headlines. Now, you're an engineer, so you know all about machines. How can AI date something?
Well, I think AI probably looked it up in an article or something. That's probably how it worked. AI can't date anything, but what AI does is it goes and finds articles or websites or reports and things like that. And so somebody's found this report which has got this date in it, and so they put the AI in, which gives it an idea of being very reliable. But AI wouldn't do that. Somebody has to do the work. Somebody has to find the rock. Somebody has to look under a microscope and find the evidence of life. That all has to be done, and they report it. And then AI finds it and says, and takes the credit for it, or somebody does, puts the credit on AI. So it just makes it sound impressive, doesn't it? That's why they do it.
Yeah, well, of course, 1 billion years older. I mean, everybody starts thinking of all these zeros and like, how could anything be even possibly that old? So how can they actually date rock?
Well, basically, they can't actually date rock. So they look at the rocks and they say, what age do you think it is? And it's based on an assumption as that the rocks formed really slowly. So they look at some rocks, layers of rock, which are really thick. They might be kilometres thick, and they say, this must have taken a long time to form these rocks. And so they just come to an estimate which everybody's happy with, about the age of the rock. So it's the rocks are really they work out the relative ages of the rock by looking at which rocks sit on which other rocks, which sit on which other rocks. So they work it out by the relative place of the rocks regarding other rocks. So they've got an order. They can say, well, this one formed first, this one formed second, this one was after that. So they've got this relative age of the rocks. And so that basically is what guides their thinking about it. And so to put a number on it, that's the big test. But there's the numbers are actually assigned by a committee that's in the UK. It's called the Commission on International Commission on Stratigraphy, and so that's got a chart with the rocks on it, and they've decided what dates go alongside which rocks on this chart. And then if somebody finds a rock, they go to the chart and they look the number up on the chart and they say, oh, that's 1 billion years old or whatever, you know. So that's how it works. They might have dated something in the lab, but I'm not sure. I'd have to read the report about that.
Now, I've heard from creation speakers in the past that there was a volcano in New Zealand that eyewitnesses saw actually erupt 50 years prior, and then they tested it. They did a carbon dating test, and it came back as, you know, thousands of years old, which was kind of weird because carbon dating, you know, for young material is generally fairly accurate. But apart from carbon dating, and I mean, I know that is a literal machine, is there any other machine that can actually do any dating on rocks?
Well, there are various methods that they use, and carbon dating it uses carbon and a radioactive element or isotope of carbon called carbon-14. So they measure that amount of carbon-14 in a sample, and so that's one method. Another one is they use potassium and argon. That's another one where potassium will decay into argon, and there's another one, uranium and lead. So there's probably dozens and dozens of different isotopes that they measure, but they're not actually measuring age. When you measure carbon-14, you're measuring carbon-14. It's not an age. So you can measure it really accurately in these machines to 8 decimal places, really highly accurate. But all you've got is the measurement of the amount of the radioactive isotope in it. And so to get the age, you have to do a calculation based on what was in the rock when it formed. And that's the big problem. That is the big assumption as to what was in there when it formed. So nobody can go back in time and make the measurement. And so what happens is the geologists who do this stuff, they make assumptions. So they make an assumption about what they think was in the rock when it formed. And basically, they try to make it very methodical assumptions and well-supported assumptions, but they're still assumptions, and it all depends. You can get any age you like depending on the assumptions that you make. So that's where it all comes from. They do measurements of these particular isotopes, which is interesting. And the interesting thing is, I think this is a kicker. The kicker is that geologists don't believe the numbers that come back from the dating lab unless it agrees with what they think it should be. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that sort of should settle it for anybody, is that they don't believe it themselves. And they will think up an explanation for why this date is not giving the right answer in this case. And so that's the way it works. And I always say, there is a way that you can measure the age of something, or you can know the age of something. And that is, well, for example, I know my age. It's written in my birth certificate. Yep. And I say, my mother was there at the time, and there was a doctor and a nurse, and they wrote it down in a certificate and submitted it into the records department of the government. And so that's how I know my age. And so that's called a historical method. I call it a historical method, and based on evidence of people who saw it. And that's what I say is that that's why I believe the Bible, because it's a historical method. Like, for example, you're in Newcastle. You're not in Newcastle. You're in the Central Coast, aren't you? Somewhere there, up north. And so when Australia was settled, there's a date that's fixed to that. We just had Australia Day, and there's a date that's affixed to that. And that's based on people who saw it, who were there, who wrote it down in letters and put it in logs and sent it back to England. And so that's a historical method, and that's what the Bible provides. Actually, there's a lot of people think they're really boring passages in the Bible, which is just a list of people and their ages when they had their children. And from that, you can actually calculate how old the Earth is. And so that's from that, we can calculate that the Earth is about 6,000 years old. And it's not billions of years old, 6,000, and it's explained by the events of the Bible, which include mainly the huge global catastrophe of Noah's flood. That explains why so many rocks were deposited so quickly, and so that's how we can understand. So that billion years older than we think. Well, those rocks were probably deposited very early in the flood. And they might have had a few bacteria in them, a few germs and things in them, which somebody's discovered under a microscope. And because of where they were buried, they said, these are 3.8 billion years old or something. They've looked it up on the chart. And so then they've published this thing, or maybe AI looked it up on the chart for them. And so that's why they've come up with that headline. And the headline is to sell papers. It's clickbait, you know what I mean?
Yes. Well, I'm surprised what you said. Like, I've heard you guys actually talk to us before about how, really old stuff is quite often theory and they've just made up a date. But then when we talk about the machines, even carbon dating, I always assumed that the carbon dating machine, although its date wasn't highly accurate, it was a good estimate. But now that you're telling me that there's theory and estimates going into just how the machine works, the machine itself doesn't actually give dates. It only tells you how much of a material is in a rock, which makes sense. But all of a sudden, I guess I'm starting to think, okay, so there is actually no machine ever that's been created that can actually measure a date.
Can actually measure a date. That's right. They can go back in time and measure the date. There are machines that do measure time, such as a stopwatch, and the way they measure races.
But you've got to turn it on at the start.
You've got to turn it on at the start. That's right. And if you don't turn it on at the start, you can't get the time. So that's the way it goes. And that's what I say is.
Hello. I think we've just lost Dr. Dr. Tas, rather. I'll try and get back in touch with him. We'll go into a song right now. We've got Lecrae and For King and Country here with I Still Believe. We'll be back with Dr. Tas, after a bit of a break. Okay, it is 22 minutes to 5. And we're back on air with Dr. Tas. We've got him back again. Don't know what happened before, but sometimes I think the bad guy tries to slow us down a little bit and causes stuff to happen. But Dr. Tas, great to have you back again. Now, we were talking a little earlier about the rock ageometer. There isn't actually such a machine. So we've pretty much talked about how you can't put ages on rocks. However, things like carbon dating can actually tell you how much carbon-14 or whatever is actually in the rock. But there's no machine known to man. There are a few machines that can tell you about different materials in the rock, but there's nothing that can actually put a date on it. Now, interestingly, Dr. Tas, you wrote a story in the Creation magazine called The Old Man of Hoy. And it was a story about this rock formation where obviously the local tour guides tell people they've got this big formation that's 370 million years old. That was interesting.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So it comes off the chart. They've got a chart which they use, and they look up the chart, and it's got the ages on it. And, they try to work. It's all based on assumptions. So they assume that everything happened slowly, and so that's why it took so long. So we come along and take the information, and we show, hey, this really fits in with what the Bible talks about, the global flood that destroyed the whole world. And so that's what I do. I really enjoy doing that. I look up all the information and then just reinterpret it. And some of the guys are really funny. They say, you're taking my information, and no, I don't like that. But anyway, they measure a lot of things. We do a lot of measurements too. And there's quite a lot of creationist geologists. But this old man of Hoy, it's a good name. It's sort of on the northeast corner of Scotland, right up there in the North Sea, and at the Orkney Islands, and it's on the second largest island called Hoy, and so that's why they call it the Old Man of Hoy, and which is really interesting. And it's very tall. It's nearly 140 meters tall, which is 450 feet high. And it's sitting right up close to the island because a lot of the island's been eroded away.
Yep.
It's about 100 feet away from the island. And it's skinny, a really skinny piece of rock. And it's hard, very hard rock. And it's about 30 meters wide at the base. It goes up, and you can see it's sort of got a reddish colour, nice, and it's called the Old Red Sandstone. So I think that's what it's called, the Old Red Sandstone. And you find this sandstone in lots of places around England, and it goes as far as right up to Norway and all to the other side of Ireland and that. But you can see the sandstone there, and it's amazing evidence of deposition during Noah's flood. It just deposited in a lot of sediment, washed in really quickly in great big layers. Some of the layers are about as thick as a man is high, which is really interesting.
Yep.
And so you can see that there was a lot of water, washed a lot of sediment into this area, and then it's been eroded away. So it was washed in as the waters of Noah's flood were rising, and it filled up an area from Ireland right through to Norway. And this area, they call it a basin. Geologists call it a basin. But it's got about 4,000 meters of sediment in it, 13,000 feet. And this is just the top little bit of the Old Man of Hoy.
Yep.
And it is amazing. There's a picture in the Creation magazine of a close-up of this sea stack, and it just doesn't look like the layers are very thick. But then you can see there's some people climbing it. You wouldn't believe, but there's people climb this thing, and there's been some really young people. I don't know how the youngest was. I think he was under 10, and the oldest was sort of over 70, and they climb this thing. I don't know if anybody's died trying to climb it. But I'd sort of be worried that the whole stack was going to fall over. But it is getting eroded, and that is another indication that the land has not been there for millions of years. Otherwise, it would have all eroded away. And so, it's just an amazing evidence that supports the biblical history of the earth.
You've mentioned, you said an enormous volume of sediment was deposited in this basin, which includes conglomerate boulders, sandstone, mudstone, and siltstone. Now, when the guys that do the tours, obviously, whoever did their dating, you're saying they would have dated a rock, but this is sort of numerous rocks within the pillar. Which one would they have used?
Well, they don't actually date a sedimentary rock. So a sedimentary rock is sandstone, conglomerates, boulders, mudstone. They don't actually date that. They are looking for a volcanic rock. So there might be a volcanic rock which is underneath it, or one that cuts across it. You might see a volcanic layer that goes across the rock. So they will try to date those. They'll measure the stuff in and try to work out an age from those. And so what they do is they try to work out a scheme where all the different layers that they've mapped, they work it out by going around and looking at a map of the area and seeing where these layers are, and they draw them on a map. And so they just try to work it out so that it all makes a nice, easy, gradual sort of smooth progress of dates. So from very, very recent to very, very old. And so that's how they do it. And there's a lot of arguments that go on about this, and some people will publish something and say, oh, this should be older or this should be younger, and which is the way it goes. But they come to an agreement on what they think the ages should be, and did I mention to you, they look it off a table called the International Commission of Stratigraphy. And so the rock could be dated. The other way the rocks are dated is it could be dated by the fossils that are in it, or that's how the dates are determined. So if you find, for example, the dinosaur bones, they would put that as sort of 100 million years. If they find a trilobite, they would put that as 600 million years. And so the fossils are used, strongly used to be able to decide what number to put on these rocks, which makes it difficult for when the rocks don't have fossils in them. So that creates another problem, and that's in the pre-Cambrian. But it's an interesting the way they do it. But creationists, we've got a table called a geology transformation tool. It's available on the website creation.com, free. And if you see a date, say for the Old Man of Hoy, 370 million years, you just look up this chart and it will tell you where it formed. It formed as the sediments of Noah's flood were inundating the earth, and then we just sort of make a little bit of a guess, and so maybe a month or so before it reached its peak, before it started to recede. So that's as the waters were raising on the earth, and they were depositing the sediment in these great big basins, and Noah's in the ark being saved, and the water's going up, and he says, the water kept rising and rising, which is what the Bible says. It's very interesting to see how that happens.
I mean, that makes so much sense when you talk about sedimentary rock. It comes from sediment. And as you explain in this story, it's some areas or some parts of that basin are 4,000 metres thick. I mean, how else could you possibly get that much sedimentary rock unless it was a catastrophic flood?
That's right. Well, of course, the mainstream geologists, they say, it formed slowly. And so they say these big sandstone layers, which these guys are climbing up. You can see the pictures of them climbing up. Yep. They're 6 feet thick, 2 meters thick. They say, it must have been deposited in a desert, because they can't imagine how it could be deposited by lots of water. It would blow their idea out of the arena. And so they say it was deposited in a desert. And so if you go there, that's what the tourist guide will say. Oh, this is a desert, and this was situated down at the equator, 300 million years ago. There's a story that comes up, and the question is, were you there? Did you see it happen? Who saw it happen?
Wow. Yeah, so it's all theory. Very interesting. Look, it is the end of our time today, Dr. Tas, but I believe you'll be with us again next week. Is that right?
That was quick, Mick, but whenever I talk to you, it always goes quick.
It does, too quick. Now, for next week, if anybody does have any questions for Dr. Tas, we'd love you to send them through. Just text them through to our text line 0401 949 949. Dr. Tas, thank you so much for another awesome week.
It's been great. Good on you, Mick. Bless you.
You too. Thank you, Dr. Tas.